The droplet of water. We all watched that droplet of water racing down the windowpane, racing against its other friends, bravely facing the obstacles which the path set for it, never stopping until it reached that finish line where it would disappear, forever. We all watched it bump into other very similar droplets of water, and after a few milliseconds of struggle, we watched our droplet of water come out of the struggle sometimes slightly bigger than it was before, but never really unscathed. We all lost that droplet of water we were so intently following, lost it amongst all the other droplets of water that were so alike, yet we knew that, after having given it a few seconds of our lives, that droplet of water was different from the others, that droplet of water was a winner. We are all little droplets of water always rushing to that finish line, always wanting to get there as soon as possible because that is the only thing most of us know about life, reaching that final destination. Crossing that finish line, completing a daily task, getting through the day. We're all rushing through life, crossing millions of strangers' paths, sometimes making eye contact, sometimes avoiding it, running through a park keeping our mind on that 10-kilometer goal, phones strapped onto our bodies keeping track of every step we take, knowing full well that it is only our very last step which will really make a difference. We've all done it at some point in our lives. It is a way of life, some may even say. But let me tell you what happened to me when I stopped, just for 10 seconds, and took myself out of the never-ending race I called my life. All it takes are those few seconds that you'll remember for the rest of your life as the day you stopped surviving and started living, at least that was how it happened for me. As usual, I was rushing to get to my destination. It was nearly 6 o'clock and I had to get back home to make myself dinner and rush through that too in order to get a head start on my school assignments. Deadlines, projects, cooking, house chores, administrative work, amongst others, were a few things bubbling inside that head of mine that particular evening. To reach my place there was a park I had to cross and that's what I was doing, blindly following the path which I thought I knew off by heart, my feet moving to a choreography that I had practiced a million times to get home. And that's where the story really begins. One single word: stop. I had not noticed him because I was too busy creating a to-do list in my mind. But a stranger was heading straight towards me. No, not in the ill-swerve out of your way once a reach you kind of way. Had I been more attentive, I would have noticed that he had been heading straight for me, his eyes fixated on his target, me. My eyes were on the sandy pathway, so even if he was straight in front of me, I still did not see him coming. However, I felt it. That feeling when someone invades your personal space, it makes you feel uncomfortable, and forces you to take a step back. That was exactly what I felt. But in that second before the human collision, I heard that word. It was a whisper that gently caressed my cheek, almost making it tingle, as though someone had lightly brushed a strand of hair away from my face. Stop, too. Those eyes, the word had taken me by so much surprise that my body froze and the impending crash of two human bodies never came. Had I been more aware of my environment, I would have noticed that he had purposefully invaded my personal space. He had approached me with a goal in mind, but that goal was not to tackle me to the ground. So he had actually been the one to stop the crash. My body was still frozen. I did not look up to see who I had almost crashed into. I did not have to because a second later I was staring into a pair of mismatched eyes. One was blue and the other green, both were absolutely beautiful and they were drawing me in. His pupils had dilated and the colors in his eyes were strangely becoming brighter and brighter. I was spellbound, unable to rip my gaze from his and unable to pull my body away from his. It had only taken him 2 seconds to have my full attention. 3. The reflection, I did not even notice the speed at which his hands shot out of his pockets to steady me because his eyes never left mine. It was just starting to get dark because the sun had just set behind me and the sky was streaked with magnificent brushes of red and orange. It took me only a third second to admire how the park was actually beautiful at this precise time of the year. The last streaks of sunlight gleamed on the surface of the running water in the stream that ran across the lush green park. The shrubs of white seasonal flowers had bloomed and their petals were sparkling as though someone had sprayed them with glitter. How did I know all this? Because everything behind me was reflected in those bright eyes of his, which I could en.
For Grandma Margaret the First have just gotten home from the longest of long 12 hours that somehow turned into 16 hours because of staffing issues, nursing shifts. I am exhausted mentally and physically, and I feel filthy with sweat, tears, and many other things I should not be covered in. All I want to do right now is chop something into oblivion until I feel somewhat normal again. I want to not have to think for just a little while. When I unlock my apartment door, I am surprised to find Grandma Margaret sitting at the kitchen table. Smiling, as always. After a shower and a change of clothes, I realizes that exactly what I need to do, is make nefla soup for myself and Grandma. What is nefla soup, you may ask? It is a German dumpling soup that you'll be hard-pressed to find in any diner outside of the Midwest. Those who eat it are picky about how it is made, and no two people make it exactly the same. Not only that, but it is a recipe that is impossible to make exactly the same every time that you make it. Grandma Mary taught me how to make it as a small girl. Long before junior high and shortly after I learned to read. It has always been our favorite meal to share. Starting with the vegetables, I carefully peels the potatoes, making sure that I cut off the skin, and only a small amount of potato. No conversation passes between the two of us. Grandma always knows when I needed a mental break at the end of the day and how most times I can't talk about what went so horribly wrong due to patient privacy. She never pushes me to talk about it. Instead, she sits at the table and watches as I goes through the motions of preparing our dish. A pound or so of potatoes later, I'm never too careful about the amounts that go into making nefla soup, or the recipe. Nefla soup is not a dish of measurement, it is a dish of feelings. The amounts that go into it depend on what you're hungry for at the moment, what looks right, or what feels right. No recipe has ever been put on paper, just passed on from one generation to the next with wise words of, "Whenever it looks like enough, dear." Grandma always said that it was not a recipe meant to be shrunk or modified. It always makes a large amount, and any attempt at shrinking has been unsuccessful, although making it larger comes out perfectly every time. This works well when you are from the Midwest, and are a firm believer in freezing the extra for a day when you don't want to make it from scratch. I chop the celery, carrots, and onions quickly as Margaret looks on from the table, nodding her approval occasionally. Once all of the vegetables are cooking in a lot of butter, yes, it's bad for you, but most comfort foods are, it's time to make the nefla dough. My favorite part of making this meal, and also the most comforting. Eggs, flour, and a tiny bit of chicken broth get mixed together until everything is mixed together. The secret is to use only a certain amount of flour and add more chicken broth until it is right. Doing the reverse, adding set amounts of all three ingredients and adding more flour tends to make the dough taste just like you would think it would. Flour. Some people prefer chicken noodle soup, others like macaroni and cheese after long days. For me it is nefla soup. Creating the dough is one of the most relaxing things I could think to do after a long day, and Grandma watches carefully as I knead the dough and rolls it into snakes. Only every once in a while does she gestures to add just a little more chicken broth. Dropping bits of dough into boiling chicken broth puts me into a trance. As I place the lid on the pot to boil for several minutes, my mind slips into the past. The bad melts away quickly, and memories of standing on a stool wearing Grandma's second-best apron make their way to the front of my mind. I remember the hem of the apron dragging on the floor at first, being so little I could barely see over the counter. Then I remember the awkward middle school years and unloading my boy and friend troubles over a bowl of nefla dough. Lastly, I remember becoming an adult, and trying hard to make time in my busy life for Grandma's house at least once a week. Though, once work, friends, significant others, and my own children came into the picture, it seems that almost 2 would go by before I found myself back in her kitchen again. As I put the finishing touches on the soup and turn off the burner, the memories fade and I am back in my own apartment once again. Grandma says nothing, but she has always made my day better, just by being there. I dish a single bowl of soup, butter a piece of bread, because nothing goes with nefla soup the way a buttered piece of bread does, and sit down at the table. Grandma Mary has been gone for 11 years now, and on the hardest days, after the worst shifts, I always miss her the most. The regrets become an inner monologue, before being spoken out loud. Did I spend enough time with her?